congratulations. We have made it to the end of HSK 2. It's a big deal. This portion, this iteration of the course was 40 videos. Each video, besides the review videos, the majority of videos had 2 or 3 segments to them. And so you add that up, that's a lot of things that you've learned. And so great job. So now I'm going to do a review, a massive review of all of HSK 2. I'm not going to go into much detail. I'm not even going to give an example for each one. I'm just going to kind of state the point that was learned, maybe give an example, maybe not. And the idea is that you, if it doesn't ring a bell, if you have no idea what I'm talking about with a particular point, then it's probably a good indication you should go back and restudy that point and refresh yourself on it. So that's the idea of what I'm doing. I'm not really teaching anything new. I'm not really going into a lot of detail. I'm just kind of stating what we have learned so that if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you don't remember at all, that's probably a good indication you should go back and review. Okay, so we're just going to start with point 1. We talked about continuation with 还, like 我还在办公室. I'm still at the office. So 还 means still, so it's kind of like continuation. That's the basic meaning of 还. We also talked about 还 meaning and also. So if we're referring to one subject and saying 2 things about that subject, we can use 还 to say like 我会说中文还会说英文. I can speak Chinese and I can also speak English. And so that we cannot use 还 to connect 2 different subjects who are doing the same thing. Like he is studying Chinese and that other person is studying Chinese. We can't use 还 in that sense to say also. And then we talked about 还 moderating positive adjectives. That means moderating means bringing down the intensity. So if I want to say something is, I could say 很好, meaning very good, or I could say 还好, which means good but not great. You know, it just kind of brings down the intensity. And that's very common with things like 好, 可以, 行, things like that. All right, then we went into negative commands. We talked about how 别 and 不要 are used to say don't do something. 不要坐, do not sit. And then we talked about putting a le at the end of the phrase, and because le indicates a change, it means stop doing that thing. Don't do that thing anymore. And so like 别说话了 means stop talking. Are you wishing I would stop talking? You can say that to me. Just shout it into your computer or phone. 别说话了. No, I'm going to keep going. Then we talked about 都, emphasizing the quantity. So 很多人都回家了. Many people, all, went home already. 很多人都回家了. So it doesn't, here the 都 is not functioning to literally mean all. It's just emphasizing the quantity. And so that's one way that 都 can work, where you might say everybody and then with 都, everybody and 都, but sometimes it doesn't mean literally everybody. It's just kind of emphasizing the large quantity of the thing that was said. Then we talked about 什么都, and so if we put the question word 什么, meaning what, before 都, it means everything that we're talking about. It means everything. 我什么都要, that means I 什么都要. I want everything. 我什么都要. The reason we're putting 什么 before the 都 is because whatever the 都 applies to always comes before the 都. And so Chinese will do some gymnastics to make sure that's true. You don't say 我都要什么. You could say that in some cases, but it means something different. All right, then we talked about different ways to say already. The main way you translate already is 已经. So, and then 已经了 at the end of the sentence. So 我已经吃饭了, 吃过饭了. 我已经吃过饭了. I have already eaten. So that's the main thing. And then we talked about do with time, and it can also mean the same idea. It's kind of like surprising. 都3点了, it's already 3 o'clock. 他怎么还没来? How come he's not here yet? And so that's, do can also mean already. Okay, then we talked about expressing briefly or a little bit. So if you have a verb, there are two ways to make that verb casual or to sound like a little bit or briefly. And do you remember the two ways? One is to reduplicate it, to double it. So, 看看, to have a look. Or you can say 看一下, 看一下. It has basically the same effect. Those two things, 看看, 看一下, mean the same thing. It makes it lighter and quick and sounds casual. It has this idea of like, yeah, it's a very Chinese way of talking. We've actually talked already about at least one other reduplication, which is of measure words, but we'll get there. Then we talked about expressing when, like, so when, not the question when, but the saying like, when I was 5 years old, such and such happened. So that is, the way that goes is, I was 5 years old, 的时候. So the 的时候 goes at the end of the I was 5 years old. Not so in English we say when I was 5 years old. In Chinese it's I was 5 years old, 的时候. And then something happened. We talked about using the verb 姓, meaning to be surnamed. So 我姓马, my surname is Ma. We also mentioned a formal question, 您贵姓? What is your honorable surname? 您贵姓? Otherwise, you can just use the more modern Chinese sounding 你姓什么? Then we talked about the filler word 那个, which means and like you can put it basically anywhere where you, just like in English when you want to say you can be like 那个. Then we talked about modifying nouns with the phrase with a phrase plus da. So here we took the da that you know as being like marking an adjective, making anything into an adjective, or making it into a possessive, like 我的身体, my body, or an adjective, 高兴的男孩, happy boy. So the idea is that we can take any longer phrase, put a da after it, and put it before a noun, and voila, we have this super long adjective phrase. Like in English, we might often say, we use relative pronouns to accomplish the same idea. So the blue ball that was at the park popped. The blue ball that was at the park popped. So we use that was at the park. But in Chinese, you take that at the park and you put it in the front of the noun and you put the right there. And that means at the park, the ball popped. And which I think is amazing. It's so much easier than Chinese. It just fits right in with how adjectives work anyway. They go before nouns. It's just taking any phrase, putting the there, and then it will describe that noun. All right, then we talked about actions in a row. So when you have two actions like 来我家吃饭. So come to my house, eat. In English, we usually have a connecting word there, like come to my house and eat, or come to my house to eat, something like that. Where in Chinese, when you have those like actions that are side by side, that are not simultaneously happening, but they're like come to my house to eat, generally they are just put side by side with no connecting word at all, and it's usually clear what's meant. So that's a big difference between Chinese and English. Then we talked about verbs that take indirect objects. 借我一本书可以吗? So that's the example I'm looking at. Lend me a book. 借我一本书. The idea is that some verbs, just like in English, some verbs can take a second object or an indirect object. Like, I'm not actually thinking of any other examples, so I just use this one. 借我一本书. So lend me a book. So me is the indirect object because I'm not being lent. The book is being lent, but it's being lent to me. So lend me a book, just like in English, lend me a book. 借我一本书. And the trick is that you just kind of have to memorize which verbs can do that and which verbs can't. I'm guessing that Chinese actually has fewer of them than English, but I've never done a study. Okay, so then we talked about some different uses of 就. So we can express then. So if we have we sort of have like a since phrase, a cause in a way, and then we have another phrase with 就. By the way, where does 就 go? Do you remember? 就 always goes after the subject of the second, or well, really any sentence that it's in. It's always subject 就, never, sometimes there's no subject and then it would be the beginning of the phrase, but if there's a subject, it's always subject 就, not the other way around. Some words, like some connecting words, conjunctions go before the subject, some go after. 就 goes after. So we talked about like 太无聊了就走吧. So 太无聊了, that means it's so boring. It's too boring. 就走吧. Let's go. Let's get out of here. So 太无聊了就走吧. So that it means like 就 there means like then, in that case, as a result, so, something like that. So then we talked about 就 expressing earliness or excuse me, a sense of quickness. 我马上回来了. Oh, I didn't have the 就. I didn't write the 就 in the sentence. 我马上就回来了. So I, 马上 means immediately, right away. 我马上就回来了. And 就 and 了 often go together to mean to express a sense of quickness or earliness. So when the speaker feels like it's not a long time, it's going to be right away, or it happened quicker than one would expect, or whatever, earlier or quicker than one would expect, then you can have a subject 就 whatever happened 了. And then we talked about 就是 or sometimes just 就, which kind of emphasizes the meaning or says right, it's just because this happened, or I just want I think one of my examples was, well, 就是送给你. Yeah, I'm just giving it to you. No other expectation. So it can be like just, or just because, or simply, or exactly. Those meanings. Then we talked about 要 as a helping verb. It has two main meanings. It can mean will, like I will do something, I plan to do something, or it can mean want, I want to do something. And it can be a blend of those two. It can be both, like I want to and will. If you have a time phrase in it, it tends to be like will, like 我明天要去买东西. I tomorrow will go buy something, go shopping. Okay, and then we talked about saying about to. Something is about to take place. So that, like in English, we say something is about to happen. In Chinese, there are actually several words that can be used for it, but say we want to say we are about to take off. That's 起飞 means to take off. So it's we, 我们, and then we're going to put a space there, and 起飞了. So the 了 is like imminent, is the feeling of imminent. So there are different words you can put there to like 我们要起飞了, 我们快起飞了, 我们快要起飞了, 我们就要起飞了. All those words can express that like soon something's going to happen. 了. Then we talked about talking about distance, describing distance. So we have A, 离, B, so place 1, 离, place 2. And then we have an adjective saying near or far, or very far, or little far, or whatever. Or an actual number saying the distance. We talked about together. How do you say together? 一起. How do you put it in a sentence? 我们一起吃饭吧. We together eat food 吧. And then we talked about, how are we doing? You hanging in there? We're just moving along. You can always pause that video if I move it too quick. Measure words for counting. So we did a lot on measure words and numbers in this particular week. We have a number plus measure word plus noun. 一个人一杯水. Then we compared 二 and 两, which both mean two. And essentially, 二 is used when referring to the number 2 as a digit. But whenever it's counting something like 2 of something, like 2 people, then it's going to be 两. So whenever there's a measure word, it's 两 and then measure word. Then we talked about ordinal numbers, and to make something an ordinal number, which is like first, second, third, 100th, whatever, we just put d before the number, and it becomes an ordinal number. Also, it's good to point out that whenever you have second, it's always 第二. Even if there's a measure word, it's never 第两. Then we talked about 多 indicating a number in excess. So if we want to say 20 odd people, 20 some people, then we can say 20多个人. 多 kind of goes right next to a number and saying it's like 20 多, so it's between 20 and 30. And so 多 can be added right after a number to be like that number plus some. It's like that number and change. Then we talked about 几 to mean several. So 几 is a question word meaning how many, but so when it's in a question, it'll be 几 plus measure word. But if in a statement, it can also be 几 plus measure word, the same grammar, the same, it'd be the same order of everything. But in a statement, it means some, a few. And of course, context and tone of voice can tell you whether someone's asking a question or whether they're saying several. Then we talked about saying every. So every noun, like in English, we say every person is awesome. So in Chinese, it's 每 and then measure word and then the noun if it's specified, and then 都. Those two usually go together. So that'd be 每个人都很棒. Every person is awesome. 每个人都很棒. And then we talked about saying 这, 那, and 哪 with a measure word generally to say this thing, that thing, or which thing. And we mentioned also that there's an alternate pronunciation for each of them. We can say 这, 内, and 内. All right, how we doing? Then we went on to, wow, I gotta move. I'm realizing we're 17 and a half minutes in and I'm only halfway through. All right, so we got affirmative, negative questions. That was like 好不好, 去不去, or 吃饭了没有. And then we talked about tag questions that it's like right or is that good? Is that okay? Like, let's eat together, okay? And those tag questions can be either in the 吗 question form or the affirmative negative form. 是不是, 对不对, 好不好, 行不行, 是吗, 对吗, 好吗, 可以吗. Then we talked about 怎么, using 怎么 to say why, essentially, or how come. 你怎么还没起床? You, how come, have still not got out of bed. Then we talked about a list of simple rhetorical questions. 不是吗? 能 吗? 怎么会 something? I think there was another one. 谁让你? So those are rhetorical questions that can really help spice up your Chinese. Then we talked about saying 有点, a little. So it's 有点 adjective. That means a little of that adjective, like today's a little cold, a little too cold. It's usually used for negative things. Then we talked about 一点 being used also. We did a little comparison of 有点 and 一点 and how they're different and stuff like that. We talked about expressing even more before an adjective with 更. So 更好 means even better. We talked about saying really before an adjective to say really whatever, like really tall, 真高. And we talked about the 最 to say most. 最高, 最高神 means the most high God. 最高神, the most. Then we talked about the 是的 phrase, how we knew about using it to clarify information, but it's used for indicating the purpose of an action or a thing. It's used with distinguishing words when an adjective is like an either or kind of idea. It doesn't have a degree of it. To talk about one's occupation or making a strong affirmation. I will be there. Duh. Then we talked about compliments. You look good today. No, not that kind of compliment. We talked about verb compliments, which are unique to Chinese. We had degree compliments to talk about how or how well, assessing the quality of an action. With the de there, we talked about a potential compliment with like 看得懂, I can understand. 听得懂, I can understand. 看不懂, 听不懂. And so that was a specific potential compliment. And then we talked about result compliments, specifically 到, like 看到, to see, 听到, to hear. And then you can also say 见, 听见, 听到. And then we talked about 完, which is very broad. You can use it for many, many verbs. It means to finish, like 吃完, finish eating, 做完, to finish doing, etc. Then we talked about 到 to mean go. So we can say 我到上海, I'm going to Shanghai, or we can say the phrase 到 place, 去 or 来, to say going or coming to a particular place. Then we talked about 好 before verbs to say that verb is easy to do. Like 这本书好懂. This book is easy to understand. And then we talked about the aspect particle 着 attached to verbs to talk about a continuous state of happening, but it's usually kind of like a static verb. We talked about using 吧 to concede. It's not my first pick, but 行吧. Then we talked about 过 after a verb to talk about something has happened at some point in the past. We talked about using 过 and 了 together with actions that are kind of like everyday things. Like, yeah, I've done that already today. We talked about the modal particle 呢 and several different things that 呢 can be used with questions to make it a little more, give it a little more flavor. It can be used with statements to give it a little more flavor, to talk about something continuing, a certain state or action continuing. And then we talked about comparisons. 比 used like, so it's one thing, 比 another thing, and then the adjective saying like the first thing was more than the second thing. And we talked about words that can go before the adjective in that construction and after to influence the meaning and degree. I won't go into each one. You can look that up if you need to. We talked about the preposition 给 to mean for. So like, I'm going to make food for you or do something to you. It's a very, very common preposition. We talked about the preposition 对 to mean to or towards. 我对你笑. Yeah, there we go. We talked about from to, 从到, talking about movement from one place to another place, or one time to another time, or one idea to another idea, whatever. And then the preposition 往 to talk about direction, or direction or like movement toward a place. We talked about 可以, the what do we call it? The auxiliary verb 可以 to mean can, but more focused on permission. And then we did a comparison of 会, 能, and 可以, how they're different, they're in their essential meanings, but how there's some overlap and other meanings in there. We talked about 虽然, 但是, although, but. So although this happened, but this happened. We talked about expressing every time, 每次 this happened, 都 something else happened. We talked about cause and effect, cause 因为, effect 所以, and how to use those words. We talked about special cases where 在, the location phrase, the 在 phrase, can come after the verb. Certain kinds of verbs prefer that. And then we talked about 在 in meaning a different character, meaning again. And that something, you put it right before the verb to mean something will happen again in the future. So, hey, that's it. We just made it through all of them. I hope that you have enjoyed this course, this part of the course, and I look forward to seeing you in HSK 3. You are doing a great job. Keep up the good work. This is not easy, but it is possible, and it's exciting to see progress. So, good job.